Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm going to be reviewing to you Yoshi's Island Super Mario Advance 3 for the Game Boy Advance. This, once again, seems to be a pattern for these GBA Mario games, is a remake of both Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, and Mario Brothers. Like I said with my Super Mario Advance 2 review, I covered Mario Brothers in depth in my Super Mario Advance 4 review, so you can check that one out if you're really desperate to learn about the Mario Brothers mode. It's the exact same between all these games, so that it's easier to play multiplayer. On to Yoshi's Island. I didn't play much of Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo. I think I got to the castle of World 1 before I kind of just lost interest, so I wasn't nostalgia blinded or constantly comparing things. So when I usually review remakes, I like to go over the changes made, just in case you've played the original and are wondering if you should double dip. The changes I found were mostly tweaks to the level designs. There weren't a whole lot of major new additions, but I will list the ones that are noteworthy. For instance, there are 6 new levels added after you beat the game. I didn't even know these levels existed until after I had recorded all of the footage and edited all together, so I didn't test them. Similar to the other Mario Advance games, there are now voice clips added. Yoshi is now voiced as he was in Yoshi's Story. Charles Martinet recorded a new crying sound for Baby Mario. It's still pretty annoying, but not nearly as bad as it was in the Super Nintendo original. And the Shy Guys make the sound that they made in Yoshi's Story, as well as the boos having laughter. The ripple effect used when Yoshi touches a fuzzy has been slightly toned down. I've heard that it was due to the GBA's limitations, but I've also heard rumors that it was because people thought that it was Nintendo making a reference to drugs, and they wanted to make it seem more like Yoshi was just dizzy. At least that's what I've heard. I could be wrong. And some of the sound effects and colors have been tweaked to accommodate the GBA's inferior power. I didn't particularly notice that it sounded too compressed or that the game was uglier. Again, I haven't played much of the Super Nintendo version, but whereas Super Mario World on the GBA definitely looked and sounded like an inferior product, this game still sounded and looked just fine to me. I think Yoshi's Island has a really cool art style that makes it age better than most Super Nintendo games, and for the most part, it seems like it was well preserved here. So now that we've gotten over the major changes, let's talk about Yoshi's Island as a whole, because I've never reviewed this game. I didn't have much experience with the Yoshi franchise prior to playing this, but the experience that I did have was extremely mixed, to say the least. I love Yoshi's Woolly World and its remake on the 3DS, but I really didn't like Crafted World. And Yoshi's Story I used to like, but upon replaying it, I realized that it had way more problems than I realized. And from what I've heard, the other games on the DS and 3DS weren't much better. So when I went into this, I was pleasantly surprised that it was alright. It wasn't nearly as bad as Crafted World, and it was slightly more enjoyable than Yoshi's Story. I don't think it was the greatest game ever, like some people have made out the Super Nintendo original to be, but it was fine. But I think one thing that I appreciated about Yoshi's Island was not so much the clever effects that it had in its own game, but how much it was referenced in later games, especially in the Mario games. Ideas that I thought were clever in Yoshi's Woolly World actually originated in this game first. Yoshi's Woolly World just perfected it with better level design, better mechanics, better controls, etc. There were also a lot of enemies and motifs and themes used in games like Paper Mario, which had a shocking amount of Yoshi's Island representation. I guess it really solidified that Yoshi is part of Mario canon. So speaking of Mario canon, this is actually a prequel to the entire Mario series, where Mario and Luigi are just babies, and Yoshi is trying to carry baby Mario back to baby Luigi to reunite them with their parents, of which you don't actually see what they look like. I guess they were saving it for the Mario movie in 2023. The gameplay is radically different than Super Mario World, which is probably why Nintendo made the Yoshi series a spin-off in the first place, is because it doesn't really feel like a true Mario game. Kind of reminds me of Super Mario Bros. 2 now that you mention it. Yoshi can jump, of course, it's a platformer. He can also kick his feet to hover in the air for a little bit as sort of a jump correction. He can ground pound. He can throw out his tongue either forward or above him, which is a nice touch, although not as cool as being able to move the tongue in multiple directions diagonally as it was in Yoshi's story. And most importantly, he can throw eggs. There are two styles of throwing eggs. I stayed with the patient version where the cursor moves slowly and then I pressed the R button again to throw the egg. Usually these are used to hit question mark clouds, which provide a variety of effects, from giving extra stars to give Yoshi more time to catch Baby Mario, to plants that he can use to climb to higher heights. Eggs can also be used as projectiles against enemies, although I rarely used this except in the case of piranha plants, which seem to really pop out and jump scare you quite a lot, as though this was a Resident Evil game. You get more eggs primarily in two ways. There are egg blocks that dump out eggs, although instead of just dumping them all out simultaneously, you have to hit them over and over again, like in the main Mario games, or by swallowing enemies. Sometimes there are flowers that spit out eggs, and sometimes you find them lying around, but these are more of the exception than the norm. Egg management is actually really easy to get the hang of, because in most games you'd see like a counter displaying how many you have, but in Yoshi's Island they follow along behind you, although I have always been an idiot when it comes to this, and I always seem to forget how many I have, so I'll like swallow more enemies only for the egg to jump off the screen and say, nope, you already have 6, like, you don't need any more than that. Okay, fine. I can deal with inventory management. One thing that people have complained about quite a lot in the original Yoshi's Island, even vehement defenders of the game, is that Baby Mario is really annoying. And I agree with that. Every time Yoshi gets hit, Baby Mario gets trapped in a bubble and has a time limit before he's carried off by Kamek's minions and you get a game over. Thankfully, I never really had trouble retrieving Baby Mario except in one instance. Thankfully, the Switch version has Rewind to help with that. But I did find it kind of annoying that the cry was, again, not as bad as the Super Nintendo version, but still kind of grating if you, say, got hit by enemies multiple times in a row. Also, Yoshi kind of just, like, takes a while to get up after being hit by an enemy, so that added up over time. If it wasn't so frequent, I don't think I'd mind as much, but one of the biggest problems with the GBA Mario games is that because the GBA has a smaller screen, there's a lot of screen crunch, and there were quite a lot of moments where I could not see what was coming up or what was above me, and sometimes this would be really a detriment in crucial moments. Now, again, I haven't played much of the Super Nintendo version, so I don't know if that was just the art style in general, but I found that the lack of visibility was probably my biggest hindrance. I also just think the level design was just okay. There were a lot of cool ideas, but it didn't feel like any of them were mind-blowing. It felt like it was just a subpar standard platformer. There were a handful of level tropes that were revisited a lot that got really annoying. There were a lot of levels that were mazes where you'd have to figure out how to get through the environment, and these were incredibly annoying because I personally think that mazes should be left out of platformers. I feel like getting to the end goal is just a lot more satisfying because most platformers thrive on the thrill of running and jumping around, and the maze levels just took all of that away from me. There were also some annoying auto-scroll levels, although that's a prominent problem in the Mario series, so I really hope they resolve that soon enough. But apart from that, the level design was fine. Again, nothing blew me away, but I do like the little touch that each level has a name, which for some reason in the main Mario series took all the way until New Super Mario Bros. U to do. So how did Yoshi's Island get away with it on the Super Nintendo, and the main Mario games waited until 2012? I think the presentation of Yoshi's Island deserves special mention, as the Yoshi games have always tried to experiment with various visual styles. Personally, I think I prefer Yoshi's Crafted World as the best looking one, although Poochie in Yoshi's Woolly World is close behind. This game is probably my third favorite because the coloring book style aesthetic has aged really well. It doesn't complement the level design like, say, the yarn in Poochie's Woolly World did, but it's still a nice aesthetic choice as opposed to just being a copy and paste of what Super Mario World did. I also like the fact that as you go to each level you get a different colored Yoshi so that you don't have to just stick to one color all the time, and it's a nice compromise to not yet introducing the amiibo costumes in Yoshi's Woolly World. Overall, I found Yoshi's Island to be serviceable. I don't think I'll ever replay it because the annoying mazes and auto-scrollers just bugged the heck out of me. I also didn't really like the transformations a lot, as they controlled horribly and weren't nearly as fluid as they were in Yoshi's Woolly World. I thought losing Baby Mario all the time was really annoying, and I thought that there were just too many optional collectibles and I didn't have enough incentive to want to collect them. The game also provided helper items, but I very rarely needed them. Granted, it is a bit more fair than most Super Nintendo games. Like, I find that most NES and SNES games were still like recovering from the arcade era, and so they had a lot of things like lives and timers. Whereas I think Yoshi's Island fares a lot better in that regard. There's quite a lot of opportunities to get extra lives, especially if you collect flowers to get the bonus games. There's no timer, so you can explore the levels at your own pace, except in the auto-scroller levels. And you can go backwards, so it promotes more exploration than what you would typically expect in an early Mario game. I think you guys will have a pretty good time if you decide to pick this up. If you have Switch Online expansion pack, then it's a nice added bonus, as the regular Switch Online already has Yoshi's Island, so the Switch itself already has two versions of the same game that you can compare for yourself to see which one you like better. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Let me know down in the comments if you're not clear on anything, or if you have any questions or comments. Special thanks to my patrons Matthew Rakowski, Sploon Ghost, Splatcat, and Scooter Doodle for their financial contributions. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!